Hallelujah. Praise the name of Jesus. I have a really interesting message this morning. I want to preach something that I didn't really want to say. I don't really like to talk about it. I'm not sure, there's a lot of things to say about it, but in any case, I want to preach something that I really don't want to talk about too much, but I feel I need to. A lot of times I feel compelled to say things that I don't think people want to hear, or I don't think people will even believe. And I feel like that's what, God would have me to preach or speak about. So, a few months ago, I was sleeping, and I had this dream that woke me up, and I usually sleep very well and very peaceful. Like, I don't get nightmares or anything. Like, I had a dream about a tsunami maybe like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that woke me up. Since then, I haven't really had any frightening dreams. But anyway, in this dream, I saw a nuclear explosion over the ocean, and it woke me up. And I didn't think much of it. It like scared me, and I woke up, and I was startled, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I didn't see anything but a nuclear explosion over an ocean, and I didn't see any people or cities or land or anything. So I was like, well, I probably just saw some movie about a nuclear explosion or something. I just dreamed about it. I just blew it off. I forgot about it. So then, like a week ago, I was watching the news, and it was like a French news station. They had these different professors on that were talking about Russia and the Ukraine and NATO and Putin's threats of nuclear war, and the Russian military doctrine is to escalate to de-escalate. In other words, if the Russian army finds itself losing to NATO and it knows it can't win conventionally, they have a doctrine that says they will explode a nuclear device to stop the NATO advance, a tactical nuke. And the guy, one of the commentators in the little discussion there, said that Russia would explode a nuclear device over the ocean off of some Western country as a warning that the next one will hit a city, will hit land. And he said, what do you think that will do to the stock markets all over the world? Implying that Russia, if it's impoverished and its stock markets drop 40% in a week, they can't even open their stock market for a week because it'll just totally crash. And their money dropped 30% in value in a day. Imagine if that would have happened in America. The dollar lost 30% of its value in a day. And they're just being utterly destroyed financially. It's like a Great Depression over there economically. It will be within a few weeks or a month or two if it keeps going like this, because their money's basically worthless. The ruble's worth less than a penny. It's pretty bad. And so anyway, the idea was, well, Russia could do this, and this would crash stock markets all over the world because they'd be terrified of a nuclear war. Because sinners and unbelievers are terrified to die because they know they're going to hell. Deep down in their heart, they know that they're not right with God, and God reproves the world of sin and of righteousness and of judgment. People are afraid of the judgment of God. They're afraid to die because they know they're not going to heaven. They feel condemned in their heart and soul, and they're terrified of death. So this doctrine is they will explode a nuclear device over an ocean, over a Western country, and this will crash the stock markets all over the world, and it will cause NATO's advance to halt. And then if that doesn't work, they'll actually nuke like a European country. So, I totally forgot about that dream and blew it off like, well, I must have just saw a movie or something. But then I saw that a few days ago on the news, and I was like, well, that's kind of like, like I did see a nuclear explosion over the ocean in my dream, and it did wake me up. But I just blew it off, and it may never happen, or it may happen. Obviously NATO is terrified of Russia and very reluctant to go to war and terrified of nuclear war. They can't, this 30-nation alliance, the superpower of the world, plus 29 countries, many of them the richest countries in the world. The G7, it's America, Canada, and European countries, they have 50% of the world's GDP. So anyway, 30-nation alliance is terrified to ship planes to the Ukraine because Russia said they'd attack Poland if you consider them part of the war if they did that. So first Poland was going to do it, then Russia said that, then Poland said they're not going to do it, then they said they're going to ship them to Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany, which is American Air Force Base, and then the Ukrainians could fly them out of the American Air Force Base back to the Ukraine, and be coming out of Germany, out of an American Air Force Base, because Poland's afraid to do it, because Russia threatened to bring them into the war and attack them if they did it. So then America was afraid to even let them do it out of the American Air Force Base in Germany. America said, no, we won't take the planes, we won't let that happen. We're afraid of war. We're afraid of a wider conflict. And then the head of NATO, the head of this 30-nation great and mighty alliance, said, well, if NATO went to war with the Ukraine, that would mean in a wider conflict, even more people would die. Well, that's always true. If you're going to use that as an excuse not to fight, you can always say that. I mean, you could say that when, if Russia were to attack Estonia, or Lithuania, or Latvia, these little tiny Baltic countries, way smaller than Poland or the Ukraine. If you're not willing to defend Poland or the Ukraine, and your justification is, well, that could cause a wider conflict, even more people could die, you could certainly say that over a tiny little Baltic state, right on Russia's border. Like, I'm not sure this mighty NATO alliance even has the spine to go to war with Russia, under almost any circumstances. I'm not sure. I mean, if they can't, Poland's afraid. Like, America says, oh yeah, Poland's got the green light to transfer these planes if they want to. Like, it's just Poland doing it, it's not NATO. America sounds like it's afraid. And then Poland's afraid to do it because they're afraid they'll get attacked by Russia. Now, if Poland trusted the NATO alliance, this mighty 30-nation alliance, to come to its defense, Article 5, attack on one is attack on all, it would have just shipped the planes. It said, I got all of NATO backing me up here. But everyone's afraid of Russia because nobody really wants to fight. That's what it looks like. That's what it sounds like. So if NATO ever actually goes to war with Russia, it sounds like Russia will be the aggressor and NATO will just be like reluctantly having to defend one of its NATO members that it really doesn't even want to go to fight with. It looks very weak, and NATO looks very weak, looks very afraid. Their justifications are, well, people could die. Even more people could die. It could become an even greater war. Yeah, that's true. And then that will always be true. I mean, if that's your justification to not fight, you'll never fight. You can say that anytime. I don't know about, it just looks like everybody's just afraid that Russia's going to nuke them. Like if Russia didn't have nuclear weapons and it wasn't threatening nuclear war and talking about World War III will be a nuclear war, that's what Lavrov said, this Russian spokesman, then NATO, with its massive conventional arsenal that dwarfs Russia's, would just defend the people of the Ukraine that are being slaughtered. But because this guy's got nuclear weapons and he's talking about using them, NATO doesn't want to fight. No will to fight. So, I'm not sure there'll ever even be a war. Even if he invades the Baltics, when he's done with the Ukraine, you could potentially have hundreds of thousands of dead civilians and millions of displaced Ukrainians have had to flee the country. And, if he wanted to attack the Baltics, he could just say, well, NATO's right on my border in the Baltic states. This is unacceptable. Either leave or I'm going to attack you. Or he could just move in. And NATO would probably just withdraw. I'm not sure NATO would even fight. But if NATO decides, okay, we're going to have to defend the Baltic states, then there will be a war, a conventional war with Russia, and the military doctrine of Russia is to escalate to de-escalate. In other words, launch a tactical nuke, explode a nuclear weapon somewhere, as a warning that if NATO keeps obliterating the Russian army, Russia will nuke a European city. And this could happen. Like Russia may actually nuke a European city. I mean, if your country is absolutely destitute, your people are going to starve, your money's utterly worthless, you can't even open your stock market because it's just worthless, it's crashed. Every business has fled Europe, fled Russia. They're shutting off your oil and gas. This is your only way to feed your country. And now Russia's threatening to shut off gas to Europe. And Europe, because of its insane obsession with, 1 centigrade change in temperature over 100 years, 40% of the gas and oil of Europe is from Russia. So Europe's totally dependent on Russia to a great extent. Not totally, but like half its energy. And Russia's threatening to shut down Nord Stream 1, which would decimate the European economy. Because without energy, you don't have food, you don't have transportation, you don't have electricity, you don't have anything. Everything crashes. Everything comes to a halt. Businesses, so Russia could decimate Europe's economy because we've already decimated theirs. It's destroyed. Within a few months, they will be utterly bankrupt. They're going to default on all their loans. We froze $630 billion worth of gold reserves, and gold and foreign currency reserves in their central bank. It's never been done before in human history. Just shut down a central bank. The Central Bank of Europe, of Russia, cannot use its own assets. So basically what I'm telling you is we're at war with Russia right now. NATO, United States, the NATO alliance is at war with Russia. It's an economic war. It's like a naval embargo. It's like an economic embargo. It's like a naval blockade. And anyone will tell you, if you had a naval blockade on any country, that's an act of war. Because you're basically, it's a siege. You're beginning to starve that country. When you destroy a country's economy, eventually the people starve. And the whole idea is, well, the Russian people are going to rise up, all these starving peasants, and they're going to storm the Kremlin. That's possible. But it'd be pretty hard to do. You know, with all the security, I mean, it could happen. That's the whole goal, is that somehow the Russian people would become so miserable that they'd overthrow their government. That's really what they're trying to do. And so, you know, here's a guy who had $200 billion. He's got 6,000 nuclear weapons, and he's been getting away with being a murderous, bloodthirsty tyrant for decades. And now, within a couple weeks, all his rich oligarchs who he hides his money through have lost like $100 billion. You know, the value of his currency has become worthless. His stock market's totally crashed, and all foreign investments from all over the world have withdrawn from Russia. And 140 countries in the United Nations voted against him. Only 4 voted for Russia out of 140 out of other countries of the world at the UN General Assembly. So here's a guy who was living in absolute luxury in palaces, who's seeing everything he had for decades be destroyed within a couple weeks. And there's no real political out for him, because if he just withdraws back to Russia, he doesn't control the Ukraine, so the whole thing was a failure. There's thousands of dead Ukrainian civilians, thousands of dead Russian soldiers, and the economy of Russia is absolutely destroyed. You know, he'll be hated by his own people eventually. And now he's shut down the internet. As of March 11th, he's going to control the internet in Russia, kind of like what China and North Korea do. And he's shut down freedom of the press in Russia. You say anything against the war, you can't even call it a war, or you could get up to 15 years in prison. So he's shutting down freedom of speech, freedom of the press. He's a total dictator. He's gone from an authoritarian to a totalitarian. He's a dictator. And he ruined his country. You know, all that wealth that he had and Russia had in foreign investment, and he's being destroyed economically. Like, Russia has been destroyed economically. So, you know, he's so proud and angry and bitter and resentful, and he's got underground nuclear bunkers. He could launch a nuclear war and just go into an underground bunker and survive. You know, he's just a hateful, bitter, vengeful man who's slaughtered, I don't even know how many, probably hundreds of thousands of people between, you know, Chechnya and Grozny and Georgia and, you know, Aleppo and Syria, and, you know. So basically, you know, if he's really just angry and bitter and out of control and vengeful, he might just attack the Baltics or Poland, or who knows. You know, he could do anything. He could launch a nuclear missile. And that would definitely crash the stock markets all over the world. Well, they'd probably just halt trading. That's what would happen. They wouldn't, like, if stock markets really begin to crash, they halt trading. Because they pause it, you know, they'll stop it every day. They won't just let it go forever. It'll only go like 5 or 10%, and then they'll just halt trading because they don't, they want to see if it'll calm down. They don't want to lose it all overnight. So, but the world is asleep. Nobody's really even like Americans are just thinking about my house, my car, my vacation, my motorcycle, my boat, my all their electronics. And people in America are just materialistic, a lot of them, and they're just kind of like obsessed with their own life. They're not even watching what's going on. This is the worst nuclear crisis the world has ever had since the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 1960s. No political leader since the Cuban Missile Crisis has threatened nuclear war and talked about World War III since the 60s. This is a lot more serious than people think. So, we'll see what happens. Maybe he just cuts his losses. They split Ukraine in half and he goes back to Russia, and, his people just live in poverty for years to come, trying to recover from all this. But, Europe, because it's so worried about supposed climate change, it became reliant on Russia for energy, which is an absolutely stupid thing to do. So it really can't stand up to Russia too much, because Russia could shut down its economy by cutting off oil and gas to Europe. And the same thing with the United States. How's the United States going to stand up to China if it invades Taiwan when the United States economy is utterly dependent on China for almost half of what it has? Like, we import almost everything we have from everywhere, and 25% of the world's manufacturing is in China. We say we're the largest economy in the world, but that's GDP. That's not talking about employed people. China is the factory of the world. It has 775 million people working for it. 775 million people are working in China. They have massive factories. And, America's a consumption-based economy, so basically China could shut down the American economy if we ever had to go to war with China. Just like Russia could shut off Europe's oil and gas and shut down their economy, which they may do because we've already destroyed theirs. So they don't have much. There's not much more we can do economically to Russia at this point. So they may retaliate and just destroy us economically. It won't destroy us, but it'll hurt us. We'll be more poor. Everything will cost more. And for some reason, we're so worried about climate change, we can't drill in America. Can't drill for oil. But now the administration's going to Venezuela and Iran, trying to get them to sell us oil. Like Iran's, better than Russia. I mean, it's just the same thing, exact same thing. Iranians hate us. Hate our guts. They chant death to America. Why don't we buy oil off them, give them any money at all? It's the same thing like Russia. Anyway, it's an utter mess. America's not recognizing its weak underbelly as its inability to be self-reliant economically. It shouldn't be a consumption-based economy. It shouldn't have a $30 trillion deficit. You can't just print money forever, and you shouldn't be relying on China for anything. How do you fight a country that controls your economy? So you can't, it doesn't matter how big and strong your military is if you're economically weak and you're just going to run out of money and everyone's going to go broke. And they're going to be starving and furious. And, riots and who knows. So, you have to be strong economically, and then you have to have a will to fight. When the president said, well, under no circumstances will we fight send any troops to the Ukraine, then we told Russia we're terrified to fight. They can invade. We're not going to do anything militarily. Every time NATO says they're terrified of World War III and they don't want to fight and they can't do this and they can't do that because Russia will get mad and they might use nuclear weapons and we might end up in a war with Russia, so we can't do this. We're just making ourselves look very weak. Like, you can't say all that and then say, but if you invade 1 inch of NATO territory, we're going to go to war with you. Like, Russia probably doesn't even believe that. Because we're constantly saying how afraid we are to get into a war with Russia. So I don't know if NATO would ever even stand up to Russia. If Russia did that, I don't know if Russia would ever do that. But if there's going to be a one world government, what would cause that? What would cause the countries of the world to finally say, okay, let's just have a one world government and have an international army that can keep the world from going to war? Maybe a nuclear exchange. Or some kind of a world war. But it does say here, we went on a lot longer than I wanted to. It says here, and there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 40 and 2 months. So the Antichrist has authority over the earth for 40 and 2 months. The Great Tribulation period is a 42-month period. It is not a 7-year period. So right there, you've been lied to by countless so-called Christian pastors. So this is Revelation chapter 13. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. That word there means get the victory over. The saints are the Christians. So there are Christians on the earth when the Antichrist is here. This idea that Christians are all just going to vanish before the Antichrist appears and is revealed and all, that's a lie. That's false doctrine. That's not true. The Bible does not teach that. That is not what it says. In any case, it says here, this Antichrist says it was given unto him to make war with the saints, that's the Christians, and to overcome them, get the victory over them, politically. He changes laws, there's a one world government, probably outlaws Christianity. Just, maybe outlaws any kind of speaking out against the one world government or the one world dictator, the Antichrist. Just like Russia has outlawed speaking against the war in the Ukraine and is imprisoning any kind of journalist that would try to report what's actually happening. This is the kind of things the one world government will do and the Antichrist will do when he has authority over all the governments of the world. And so he gets the victory over the church by changing all the laws, outlawing Christianity. Christianity is not legal in communist China, the atheist communist government of China that, imprisons and tortures and murders and harvests the organs of its prisoners. 1.4 billion people the Chinese control. There's no human rights there. There's no freedom of religion. North Korea. Russia's becoming like North Korea now. It's just a dictatorship where there's no freedom of speech, no freedom of the press. And so this is the kind of things that will be done. This is how he gets a victory over the church, through changing all the laws, imprisoning people for what they speak. And power was given unto him over all kindreds and tongues and nations, over every language in the world. So it's, like some countries have multiple languages in their country. So it's talking about every person on the planet, all kindreds and tongues and languages. Kindreds and tongues and nations. Tongues there is languages. So this man will have authority. The only way that that could ever be done is through the United Nations. There is no other political body on the planet that has authority over every government in the world but the United Nations. It doesn't now, but if they form an international army to prevent a nuclear war, and to, like they could form an international force to go into the Ukraine and take it over. If they wanted to. I mean, when someday they will have a one world government, they will have an international army. And all the governments of the world will pledge their forces to this international army. So, it looks like, and you say, well, why would these countries, it looks like this could form, was what I'm saying, through this war between NATO and Russia that may develop. And you say, well, why would the countries of the world give their authority over to one man? Well, this one man, this Antichrist, is going to get a deadly wound in his head, and he's going to be miraculously healed. He's going to appear to have come back to life. And this is going to amaze the world. They're going to see a supernatural event that will prove the supernatural. And so they will respect this man because he will appear to have come back from the dead. So he's basically imitating what Christ actually did to some degree, and he'll try to usurp the place of Christ. And unbelievers in the world who don't believe in Jesus, this is the strong delusion that Thessalonians talks about. That's how they'll be deceived when they see this man miraculously healed. So, a lot of what I preach, if you don't know Bible prophecy and you don't know the scripture, some of the things I say you might not be able to really understand that well, or you just never heard of it, or you don't know the scriptures I'm referring to. But there will be a one world government, and there may be a world war between NATO and Russia very soon, within a few weeks, or a month or two, or less. It's possible. And it may be a nuclear detonation. Russia may actually nuke a European city. Could nuke Poland. Who knows? A small tactical nuke just to stop a war. Russia's so poor and broke, it may just want to take over the Baltics now just to steal everything they have and keep it. Because they've already